I understand that this might come off as crazy, but I'm here to tell you about an experience I had back in New York when I believe I encountered what many call a Wendigo. I was staying at my cousin's property for about 2 weeks. Now, I don't know the exact name of the national forest, but its property backs up right against it. So, as you can imagine, lots of very thick woods and timber for miles and miles. As a quick back note here, I used to actually go out there and play for a long time as a kid. Him and his family have lived there for many years now. Actually, for as long as I can remember. And even though him and I have played in those woods many times, there was something about this one time that just ruined it all for both of us. Enough backstory, let me explain. So as I said, I was staying there for about 2 weeks and I had been out playing in the woods a few times. One day, when I went out to play, it was very quiet that time of year because it was later fall. There were no birds chirping or anything like that at all. And even though it wasn't too cold yet, you could just feel something ominous in the air. I remember walking around and I had gotten a little bit lost. I didn't mind though because I feel like I knew the property well enough to find my way back, but something happened that scared me so badly I ran all the way back to the house in probably 30 seconds flat. I was walking through some tall patch of grass when I saw what emerged like a very large animal. It was taller than me or my dad, and it was very skinny and lanky. To describe it, it almost looked like a skeleton with skin stretched over it, if that makes any sense. And its eyes, I'll never forget it. They were black as coal, and they stared deep into my soul. I couldn't move. I remember being frozen in fear. It began making this strange noise like a cross between a growl and a hiss, but I never saw its mouth, or what I thought was its mouth, moving. It snapped out of it and kind of just quickly vanished. Anyway, when I got back to the house, I told my cousin what had happened, and he said it sounded like it might have been a Wendigo. At this time, I had no idea what a Wendigo was, and I'm not sure if that's even what I saw, but whatever it was, I can tell you it was not a human. There's no way somebody was in a costume. That following night, something equally creepy happened to us. My cousin and I were sitting in the living room watching TV when we heard a loud thud on the roof. We both looked at each other and then went out to see what it was. There was nothing, but we could still hear like something was moving around on the roof. It sounded like it was moving back and forth or pacing the entire length of the house. After about 10 minutes of this going on, probably less, my cousin and the family decided that they had had enough and grabbed their guns. Now, I don't want to be out there alone, but my cousin insisted that I stay out there with him to see if they could spot anything. I went back inside, waited for him, and about 5 minutes later, he came back outside with his gun. And he said that he saw something large jumping off the roof and skidding into the woods. He said that it was something large and black, but did not get a good look at it, since it happened so fast. We pretty much stayed up all night locking every door and window, waiting for something to happen. We're very thankful nothing else did. The next day, we went out looking for any signs of anything unusual, but found nothing except some footprints that seemed to be distorted in the ground. It was really hard to make out what they could have been. After that night, we really didn't see or hear anything else. I stayed there for the rest of my visit, but never really went out to explore the woods again after that. Look, I don't know what it was that I saw, but whatever it was scared me really badly. I just wanted to get away from it as fast as possible. And even though I wasn't too far from the house at the time of my sighting, I still felt very alone and vulnerable. It's been years since this happened, and I've not gone back to that property, but whenever I do, I will definitely be staying far away from the woods. I spoke to my cousin a couple months ago, and we got on the conversation of the story I just told you. Well, he never told me this, but he began to tell me some stories of when he had gone out in the woods venturing himself. There was one day in particular that he was exploring. And remember, the plot of land was incredibly large, so there were a lot of trails to go and explore. As he was doing this, he explained to me he started to get the feeling that he was not alone. Now again, keep in mind this forest is massive, and in the area that they're at, there's really not too many people going through it. So he felt like something was watching him, and he began to get really freaked out. He tried his best to ignore it and kept walking down the small game trail. And as he did this, he swears that he heard what sounded like footsteps or something or someone following behind him. He assumed at first maybe it was a deer or a dog, but when he turned to look, he saw that it wasn't a dog, and he could swear that something large was behind one of the trees, making this strange sound. And he swears that what he saw had horns on its head. Needless to say, he got out of there as fast as he could and didn't go back in the woods for at least a month or two before he was brave enough. He never elaborated how much later or earlier this was to our experience together, but then he went on to tell me that there was another time, probably no more than 3 to 4 months later in the fall, where him and his friend were tasked with going outside and chopping up firewood. It was about noon, he recalled, and he had been working hard all morning. So him and his friend decided to take a break and have some lunch. They sat on top of a large rock right near the home that overlooked a small valley where a small stream is running through it. This same valley he's talking about is the same one that him and I have played in many, many times. So they sat there on the rock eating their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and they heard something large moving through the tree line. Whatever it was so big, it made an obvious noise like a bulldozer going through the woods. My cousin looked at his friend and pointed and said, "It's him, he's back," and turned pale. He told me that he has seen it many times, and he is certain that it has been watching him for a while. Needless to say, they both got out of there, and to this day, he still isn't exactly sure what kind of creature he dealt with, or if the experience him and I had versus the ones he had are all different creatures or perhaps the same thing. I had an experience with a strange being that I can't quite understand. I rented a cabin in the woods in Washington State back in 2007. I was a young man at the time, 28. My girlfriend at the time and I went up there for some alone time, away from the stress of life and everything else that was bogging us down at the time. We were both avid hikers and lovers of the outdoors, so we tried to spend, or at least planned to spend, our trip exploring. The cabin itself that we had rented wasn't too far into the forest, but it still was enough that it felt like you were in your own world once you got out that far. It was a pretty large area, lots of trees, wildlife everywhere. There was even an old abandoned barn about halfway between where we stayed and where we parked. The barn was roughly about a mile away from the cabin, and we decided on the first day to go check it out. It wasn't too far in the woods. It was kind of more out in an old meadow. There's a small creek that runs through part of it, which you have to cross over in order to get there. On the first day, as stated, my girlfriend and I thought it would be a great idea to go exploring right around that old barn. It was around here that we noticed strange smells we could not immediately identify. My girlfriend at the time recalled that it reminded her of something like a skunk mixed with a dead, rotting animal. I agreed. It's possible that something large was bedding down there, and that might have been the reason for the stink. We continued on our way and explored the barn and the area around it. It was pretty spooky inside. It seemed like it had been untouched for a while, and there were a bunch of old, rusted tools. There really wasn't much left, but you could tell it had been a very long time since this barn was actively used. After exploring around for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, we decided to explore further in the woods. Now, right on the other side of this barn was a small creek, as I explained previously, but this actually had a downed log in which you could use it to cross. We decided to cross over it, and I went first and made it across no problem. My girlfriend followed closely behind me. Now, as she is crossing, we both hear a very loud and deep growling noise coming from the woods directly to our right. It was so loud that we could feel the bass of it resonating through our core. I began shaking. I froze in place, and she did too when she heard it. My first thought was bear, but it sounded pretty big to be a bear. And that notion was quickly dispelled when whatever this thing was showed itself in the opening of the timberline. My girlfriend leapt back in terror. I looked at it and couldn't quite understand what I was seeing. It appeared to have the body of an upright bear, but the head of a wolf or coyote. It was massive. I would say probably around 8 feet tall and appeared very muscular, even through its thick coat of fur. It kind of glared at us for a moment, swaying back and forth behind the tree as if unsure to fully reveal itself, and then let out another short growl. I jumped back up on the log, grabbing my girlfriend in the process and running back to the cabin as fast as we could. We locked ourselves inside and stayed up all night with knives in hand, assuming that whatever animal we had somehow provoked was going to follow us and try to get us. The woods around us that entire night were eerily quiet. No crickets, nothing. You might be asking yourself, why didn't you just hike back to the vehicle and leave? To be honest, we were too petrified. We didn't really have much in terms of a weapon, but we made do with what little we had. The next day, we packed up and left as soon as the sun rose. We didn't tell anybody about this because they would have thought we were crazy. I still don't know what that creature was, but it definitely wasn't a wolf or a bear. I know that much. I have no idea what happened to my girlfriend, but we eventually broke up, and I've lost touch with her since. I've thought about this creature a lot lately, and I'm not sure if it's because of the anniversary of our trip, or because I'm just getting older now and like to reflect on old times past. It's been on my mind a lot lately, and I felt like sharing this story with you guys was important. I hope it helps somebody else understand what they are dealing with if they ever encounter something remotely unexplainable. I'm mostly Arapaho, and my family has had a string of strange supernatural encounters for as long as I can remember. This summer, though, of 2021 was probably the most intense and horrific that I've ever experienced. To give you some quick backstory, we live up here in the mountains. In the summer, we usually go up to our cabin for about a month or so. It's surrounded by dense woods, and there are tons of deer and elk that live around here, around the reservation. We also have coyotes, bears, and mountain lions around us too. I was 16, and when I was younger, when we came up here, my parents always warned me not to play outside at night because of coyotes, or so they said, and also warned me against other forces I didn't quite understand. I always listened to them and stayed inside, until as I got older, I became more rebellious. I was raised in the city to an extent, and so parts of this were all very new to me. My parents also told me that if I ever saw something scary or strange, I should run inside immediately, locking on the doors and alert them. And while there was a string of strange and bizarre experiences, I'll tell you about one in particular. So it was about July, I want to say, and I think around 9:45 or 10 p.m. We had just gotten back from town and were unpacking our groceries. At the time, I just finished doing that and setting up the fire pit outside because they wanted me to do that, and we were going to sit outside and talk. My parents told me to go inside because they now needed to talk about something important, so I did. They were acting weird the whole time, like they sensed something was wrong, I take it. So I went into the cabin, sat down on the couch, and there's a window right behind it that I could see out of. I was just relaxing, checking out things on my phone, when I got the feeling that my parents, or what I thought were my parents, were looking at me. I look up, and I see a pair of eyes staring back at me from the window. They were very close to the glass, and I could clearly see there were no pupils. They were just yellow with what looked like black rings around them. I felt my heart skip a beat, and I thought it was one of those things my parents warned me about, like a bad spirit. So I ran to the door and tried opening it. It was locked. I was confused because my parents were outside. The door was clearly unlocked, but it was almost like there was a force that wasn't allowing me to open the door. It was kind of like somebody on the outside holding the door handle and pulling their weight back, so it was physically impossible to open the door, if that makes any sense. I looked back at the window and now saw a pair of hands had appeared. They weren't human hands. They were long and black with what looked like claws instead of nails. The fingers appeared very small and pale. I'm not sure what my parents were doing or why I couldn't get outside or where they were, but I began to freak out. As this went on, I was terrified and crying, begging them to open the door and to help me. It felt like my parents ignored me. And about 30 seconds later, my mother opens the door and I fall on the ground. And she's screaming at me, wondering what the hell is going on. I calmly, or at least as I can remember, explained to her exactly what had happened, and her eyes widened and the cigarette dropped from her hand. She told me to stay inside and lock the doors. She then grabbed a gun and stayed outside with my dad. They began to talk nervously. I remember I sat there on the couch, just huddled up, as if something was wrong. About 10 minutes later, both my parents walk inside and they both looked very pale, like they knew something. My mom told me to go lay down on my bed now, and to not ask any questions, do not look outside, and stay there until the morning. What was very odd was I did as I was told, and I could hear my parents arguing about 30 minutes later about something. You know how when you could hear people talk, but you can't hear what they're saying because it's muffled? That's what it was. I don't think I slept at all that night. I just stayed huddled up in my small cabin room. As soon as the sun came up, I came out to the living room, and they were already packing the car. Nobody really said much, but my mother informed me that we are leaving now and we won't be coming back. At this point, we had only been at the cabin for no more than 2.5 to 3 weeks, so it's very odd for us to leave this early. We usually stay about a month or 6 weeks at most, and so everything just felt wrong. The whole car ride back, I can tell there was tension in the air, but there was something my parents refused to talk about. They never answered me when I asked them questions, and they almost encouraged me to stay quiet and to just not talk at all. Whatever happened that night in that cabin still stays with me to this day.